O little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. Above thy deep and dreamless sleep, the silent stars go by. Yet in thy dark streets shineth the everlasting light. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. Once in royal David's city stood a lowly cattle shed, where a mother laid her baby in a manger for his bed. Mary was that mother mild, Jesus Christ, her little child. Welcome back to My Seminary Life. I'm your host, Brandon Knight, and in today's episode, we are continuing our journey through the birth of Jesus, guided by our favorite Christmas hymns, as we reflect on hymns of arrival, O little town of Bethlehem, and once in royal David's city. But before we dive into today's hymns and passage, let's take a moment to recap what has been going on. In last week's episode, we started our journey off with hymns of longing, looking at Israel's longing for the Messiah in O Come, Emmanuel, and Come Thou Long Expected Jesus. The passage was Micah 5, 2 through 6, where Micah is prophesying about a coming eternal ruler who would represent God to the people, be a shepherd to guide and protect the people in the strength of God and to the glory of his name, who would be the King of peace and would be born in a place called Bethlehem. And today, in today's passage and through today's hymns, we actually get to see the literal fulfillment of Micah 5:2 in Luke 2, 1 through 7. So in Luke 2, 1 through 7, this is of course, the most popular and most detailed account of the birth of Jesus, which we're going to talk about that detailedness here in a moment. But the birth of Jesus, the story of the birth of Jesus, begins where all good stories begin. Government bureaucracy. Yes, of all things in verses 1 and 2, this is all starting around empire-wide census that was taking place in Rome. According to archaeological discoveries and research, Rome did censuses like once every 14 years, and when you pair that up to when Quirinius was governor of Syria the first time, that places these events, the birth of Jesus, right around the years 8 to 6 BC, kind of in this time frame, which means it's been about 800 years since Micah's prophecy. In verse 3, we find out not too much details about this process other than everybody has to return to their clan or tribe's place of origin to do this census. We don't know any other details, but I did talk about in the sermon how, we complain about census paperwork. Imagine trying to pack up and go to your clan's place of origin. I don't even know how that would work in the United States. Would we all have to go to some point of entry in order to do the census? Do I just have to go as far back as I can trace my family history? Can I just go to my dad's hometown? Can I just do that, please? So all the people have to go back to their clan's place of origin, which means in verse 4 that this guy named Joseph has to go to Bethlehem because he's from the line of King David, and King David is from Bethlehem. And I love how Luke crams that into that verse twice. But it actually makes sense that Luke would really want to make sure that this is like a moment of okay, pay attention. Joseph has to go to Bethlehem. David is from Bethlehem. He's related to King David. This is important. And it makes sense that Luke would really highlight this and that he would write the most detailed account of the birth of Jesus and one of the more detailed gospels that we have on the life of Jesus. Because if we go back to Luke 1 through 4, we'd see that he is writing this gospel and also the book of Acts to the most honorable Theophilus. The most honorable was a title that people used to give back in the day, back in ancient Israel times, to government officials. Theophilus translates from Greek to lover of God. And there is some speculation out there over whether Theophilus was a real person or a character that Luke created to represent Gentiles. These are the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts is written to Gentiles who are interested in learning about Jesus and about God. And in either case, whether he's a real person or a character that is supposed to represent a larger group of people, it would still make sense that Luke would write a very detailed birth of Jesus and a very detailed gospel, and the only book we have about what happens to the apostles after Jesus ascends to the Father. Because the Jewish people would have a very intimate knowledge of the life of Jesus, those who grew up with him, those who followed him, those who executed him, they all have like firsthand knowledge about Jesus. That would make sense then why Matthew goes to greater lengths to try and prove the divinity and prove the kingship of Jesus. Luke, writing to Gentiles, they may not necessarily have that first-hand account information like a lot of the Jewish people are going to have. They're going to have like hearsay knowledge, second-hand information, peripheral interactions with Jesus. So it makes sense that he's going to be very detailed in his account so that way the Gentiles understand, okay, Bethlehem, King David, all very important. Got it. Verse 5, we are reminded of the plight of Mary throughout all of this. Mary is evidently extremely present at this time period. Historically, back then, women were married, I should say girls were married off shortly after their first period. So that places Mary as young as potentially 12 years old, and the journey from Nazareth, where Joseph and Mary were starting, to Bethlehem was about a 4-day walk through the desert. So, man, my heart goes out to Mary. I mean, obviously, what does she care that my heart goes out to her? But my heart goes out to Mary and any other pregnant woman who was traveling for the census at this period of time. Like, that is ridiculous. I don't know what it's like to have a baby growing inside of me. I obviously know secondhand what that's like because, you know, my wife had producer Cooper not that long ago. But just to imagine like this young, very pregnant girl traveling 4 days, probably by foot, maybe at best like side saddled on a donkey, like that is crazy. That is crazy to think about. They get to Bethlehem, and you know, in all of the plays and movies, when it's like as soon as they take a step into Bethlehem, Mary goes, "Oh, the baby's coming!" Like that's just kind of how that's portrayed. We actually don't know how long, based off of verses 6 and 7, we don't really know how long Mary and Joseph are in Bethlehem before the baby shows up. But one thing we do know is that her time was fulfilled, and there was a bit of a lodging issue. So, famously, Jesus was born in a barn, or more accurately, a cave where all the animals were kept. There is a lot of takes on as to why Jesus is born in the situation that he is born into, being born in a cave wrapped in snuggly clothes, as the NLT puts it, and laid in a manger. And a lot of the takes on why this is happening, why this plays out the way that it does, it comes down to how a certain Greek word is translated. I've been preaching a lot out of the NLT. That's been my go-to translation as of late. And the NLT translates this word as lodging. Personally, I think that is far too broad. That's like they couldn't find literally any place in Bethlehem. Traditionally, in plays and movies and a lot of older translations, we all know that Jesus was born in a manger because there was no room for them in the, that's right, Motel 8. There was no room for them in the inn, which implies that Mary and Joseph got to Bethlehem, and although it was Bethlehem, as O Little Town of Bethlehem reminds us, was usually like this small, how still we see thee lie kind of town, a very not touristy place. Potentially, because of the national census going on and all the hustling and bustling back and forth, it is possible that Bethlehem was that all of the inns in Bethlehem were all booked up and they couldn't get a place to stay, so they said, but you can go stay in the cave if you want to. Some Greek scholars, though, point to a more faithful translation than that, and I saw it in the NIV as I was doing my studying for this passage. It's more woodenly understood as guest house, which would imply that Mary and Joseph got to Bethlehem. They went to whatever relative Joseph still had in Bethlehem, cousins, aunt, uncle, whatever. And either because of the census, the guest house and all the other rooms were all taken up because other relatives were in town, or potentially because of the assumed infidelity on the part of Mary, because she is pregnant and they are not married. They were not welcomed into the home, but they were allowed to go stay in the cave so that way they could have some type of lodging and privacy for Mary. So, as that all it may be, those are some of the ways that this is taken and understood as to why Jesus was born in a barn and wrapped and laid in a manger. And the point that I came to as we look at this passage of arrival, the fulfillment of Micah 5:2, the thing that I landed on here was, as we continue to move through the holiday season and long for the Messiah, and not to replace him with all of the fun, busy activities, but to look to him in all of it, the arrival of Jesus reminds us that we can rest in the chaos. Because even though Mary and Joseph kind of have a understanding, right? They do, to some extent, understand what is going on. Angels have appeared to both of them to explain what is going on here. Still, in the light of the empire-wide census going on, and the hustle and bustle of Bethlehem, and this issue of trying to find a place to stay, and potentially rejection from Joseph's family in the midst of all of this, and Mary is so pregnant that her time is fulfilled and she has the baby. In all of this, after going through a 4-day walk, there is a lot of stress and anxiety that Mary and Joseph could still be experiencing, even though they kind of have a little bit of a clue as to what's going on. I'll put it like this. This was the big idea. I'll put it like this. God is not restricted by our limited understanding of our circumstances. So as we go through this holiday season, and as we are continuing to experience the fun and the activities and the everything of Christmas, when that does start to feel overwhelming and chaotic, the arrival of Jesus reminds us that when life gets to that point, when life is chaotic and we are filled with anxiety, we can rest knowing that God is not restricted by how limited our understanding is of our situation. God has a plan. In all of this craziness, a national census, Joseph having to go to Bethlehem, Mary being extremely pregnant, not having a place to stay, God is able to bring all of that together to fulfill his purpose. And we can rest and rejoice in that, knowing that in our own life, when political unrest, personal responsibilities, anxiety, chaos, when all of that is overflowing in our lives, we can rest assured that God is working his purposes out in our life and in the world around us. Because, as O Little Town of Bethlehem puts it, the everlasting light has broken into the dark streets of Bethlehem, which is a great transition now to talk about the focus hymn of this sermon, which was O Little Town of Bethlehem that I read earlier, and our bonus B track for today's episode, Once in Royal David's City, which I keep mispronouncing as Once in King David's Royal City, but it's Once in Royal David's City. Now, O Little Town of Bethlehem is probably one of the most well-known Christmas hymns out there, right? Once in Royal David's City, I don't know if I have ever sung that song in my life until the book I've been using to study these hymns. Until I started reading this book, I don't think I've ever even heard of this one. O Little Town of Bethlehem, on the other hand, yes, I've sung this one. You sing this one every year. I was even in bell choir in middle school, and I have vivid memories of doing this song for a Christmas play, I think in middle school, and it was the good bells, not the clanky clang 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 bells, but those flat ones that are like boom, boom, boom. But if you have ever sang O Little Town of Bethlehem, and if you are one of those people out there who do actually know the song Once in Royal David's City, and you've ever thought to yourself, these are pretty simple songs. These are almost like songs that children should be singing. Fun fact, they are children's songs. They both originated as children's hymns, which I think sometimes when something like this happens speaks to the power of both what is said in the hymn and, the power of tradition as well, especially with O Little Town of Bethlehem, that now this is like a timeless classic Christmas hymn for adults. Silent Night, Away in the Manger, they have been forever typecast as those are songs for children. But O Little Town of Bethlehem, that is a song that we sing Sunday mornings with the grown-ups. Now, I did not pick both of these songs because they're both children's hymns. It actually just kind of worked out that way. I picked them because with this focus on the arrival in Bethlehem, seeing this prophecy being fulfilled here, the options are actually pretty slim. There's not too many hymns out there specifically about this part. I actually cannot find a hymn about Mary and Joseph wandering around Bethlehem trying to find a place to stay. Let's imagine all three of those translations are accurate. And all three of them are true all at the same time. There are no songs about them just wandering the streets of Bethlehem, hoping for the best that they may find a place to stay. It's saying something that there's not that many songs on Bethlehem, as significant as that part is to the story. Songs about Mary and Joseph wandering around trying to find a place to stay, those are few and far between. Songs about the angels appearing to the shepherds, plenty. I have too many options for next week's sermon/episode. Songs about grown-up Christmas lists, Tennessee Christmas, Christmas shoes, where's the line to see Jesus? Is he here at the mall? Get me a peppermint latte, give me a word that will rock me. Those are all real Christmas songs that do actually exist. Songs about the significance of Bethlehem, few and far between, and mostly for children. But let's get started now with a little bit of the history of both of these hymns. Again, both written towards children. Philip Brooks, who is apparently known as one of the greatest preachers of the 19th century. I've never heard of him, but he was one of the greatest preachers in the 19th century. He was a rector in the Episcopalian Church in Philadelphia. And in the 1860s, he went on a trip to the Holy Land to do the usual kind of sightseeing activities. When he returned, he sat down and wrote O Little Town of Bethlehem, just kind of as a reflection of his time there, and he wrote it for his children's Sunday school class. As for our B-side track, Once in Royal David City, very interesting person who wrote this one, Cecil Alexander. Cecil Alexander was a poet from a very young age. She was writing poetry as a child, and as she grew up, started writing poetry in poetry and hymns that were published in Dublin University magazine. She was writing them under different pseudonyms at the time. In her lifetime, it is estimated that she wrote about 400 poems and hymns, most of them geared towards children. Now, again, we don't really know this hymn very well, and I don't know Cecil Alexander very well, but you know who was a fan of her work? Alfred Lord Tennyson. That name I do know. Her poem, Burial of Moses, he praised as one of the few poems that he wished he would have written. That is high praise coming from when somebody who is like a powerhouse of whatever writing or creative world that you come from, when a powerhouse of that creative sphere comes along and says, boy, I wish I was the one who would have created that, you know you've got something special there. Her purpose in writing Once in Royal David City was to help teach children about the line in the Apostles' Creed, he was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary. Since 1919, King's College in Cambridge, this is one of their feature hymns as part of their Festival of Lessons and Carols. And I believe Producer Cooper has something he would like to say.
Mom, for me, is the guy there? Mom, I'm doing this, Mom.
Are you just going to be on all of these episodes? You're on last week's episode, too.
Mommy.
Why are you asking for Mommy into the microphone? This isn't a phone. Mommy's at work.
Mom.
Okay. Thank you, Producer Cooper. He does love his mommy, let me tell you, folks. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Once in Royal David City. One last thing on Cecil Alexander before we draw this episode to a close. Although we may not be familiar with this hymn, if you are... He's coming back. Do you have more to say, Producer Cooper? Oh, are you telling everybody you just got a pirate ship from Santa? Pirate, yep. One last thing on Cecil Alexander before we draw this episode to a close. Although we may not be totally familiar with this hymn, she is also responsible for the hymn All Things Bright and Beautiful, which is a more well-known hymn. That one probably actually does ring a bell to some of you hymn singers out there. And that is it for today's portion of our journey. We've longed for Jesus. We have seen his arrival. And next week, we're going to focus on the announcement of his birth. Yes. And like I said, there are almost too many options when it comes to this part when the angels appear to the shepherds. But I think I got a plan. I know which ones we're going to talk about. It's actually the hymn that I want to focus on for the actual service that I'm having trouble picking out, but there's one in particular that I know I want to talk about here on the show because it has a fascinating history behind it. Of all the hymns, there's this one about the announcement of the birth of Jesus that is quite fascinating, but we'll talk about that more next week. Thank you all for listening to today's episode, and thank you, some Joyful Noise listeners, for coming along with us through this journey here on My Seminary Life. If you haven't yet already, please consider rating and reviewing this show wherever you get your podcasts, and consider passing this episode along to somebody who maybe they love the hymn, O Little Town of Bethlehem, and want to hear a little devotional surrounding, or, well, I guess it really was a sermon, but a whole sermon inspired by it. But, if you would like to financially support the show, you can go to the link in the description to our shop or head on over to buymeacoffee.com/MSLpod. You can leave a one-time donation or consider joining one of our support tiers to get exclusive blog posts and a shout out here on the show. That's it for now. Like I said, next week we got the big one, Linus's favorite part of the Christmas story, the announcement of the birth of the Messiah. But until then, this is Brandon signing off, reminding you as always that theology is for everyone, so keep on studying.